time-lapse mode. So this chapter is actually going to be very short and simple, and because it's going to deal with exporting the textures onto the hard drive so that in future chapters I can then pick up those textures and do some test renders. Because my main focus for now will be to do some render tests and do some comparisons between Substance Painter and like Houdini or Maya or Modo. So first export, set up presets, and then do the renders to make sure everything matches. So follow my mouse all the way up to File, Export Textures. Okay, so now you're giving a window that allows you to change the settings for which you're going to be exporting the textures with. Okay, so, and the settings are based on which renderer you're going to be rendering in, right? So right now I am within Substance Painter, and I can change the look that I want within here, but it doesn't really mean much because in the end, I'm not going to be rendering my final result with Substance Painter. So because I'll be using Redshift, I want to make sure that my settings are set towards that renderer, right? So if there's any kind of conversions or anything like that happening, then I want to make sure that my textures are ready for Redshift. So we do that within this export document window. Okay, so what we find here, first of all, is the path to which we will be exporting to. So all the textures will land in this folder. Then you have your file format. Then you have your 8-bit and 16-bit. And then you have your config. And so your configuration, here you are able to choose which renderer you're going to use. Now Redshift does come with one, but it's not really all that useful because it's based on the old Redshift version. So we will be building a new one. Now, Allegorithmic, the guys that make Substance Painter, actually provide you with a metal rough preset, but personally I want to expand on that because I will be also doing opacity and things like that. So because I'm expanding on it and I want to teach you how to create your own configs, I won't be using this preset in this video. So over here we have texture sets, right? So all these textures, all these items appear in this list. And this is where we get to choose whether we want to export all the textures or only some. And of course, this is important. Initially, I'm going to be exporting everything to do my test with. And I'm going to be exporting at a small size, so 1024, which is the document size. And as I'm refining and as I'm finalizing my model, I'm probably going to want to start up-resing this to like 4K. Of course, exporting at 4K takes a lot longer than at 1K, right? So for now, I'm going to keep it small. I just want to make sure that all my colors are correct. So if we go over to the configuration tab, you'll notice that there is the presets on the left-hand side. And then here, what you have is the items that go inside the preset, right? So here you have all sorts of definitions, which channels you want to use, and the name for the textures. And then you have the input maps from within Redshift that you want to input into your textures. And then you have some other options. So to start, I think what we should do is press the plus button to create a new preset. So by pressing plus, you'll have this at the very bottom, and then just double click to rename it. And in my case, I'm going to rename it RS, meaning Redshift, and then metal rough underscore MK, and then I have a new preset made. Now, if I go back to export, and then I choose, instead of Redshift, let's just find my own, so RS metal rough MK, it's at the very bottom. But if I try to export at this point in time, I'm actually going to get nothing. So if I go back into the configuration, I'm going to get nothing because there is absolutely no maps to output, right? I mean, it says output maps. So I have to set this up. So what do I need? Well, I know, for example, that I need diffuse, right, or some kind of color, and then I'm going to need metallic, and then I'm going to need roughness and a normal map, because those are the textures that are required for the shader that I'll be creating. So first I'm going to click RGB, and this will populate the output maps section with a single item. And here I can name the texture that I'll be outputting. So in this case, diffuse color, and then underscore. And after I do this, I can actually assign a variable that will automatically name the UDIMs, right? So if I go over to here to this $, if I click it, I can go and choose the texture set. And what this will do is it will automatically change this portion of the name of the textures to represent the UDIM name, right? So in this case, I'm going to get many textures, right? One for every UDIM, but they're all going to be named diffuse color for any texture that is diffuse, in fact. So diffuse color underscore, and then 1001, and then 1002. So I'm going to get diffuse color underscore 101, diffuse color underscore 1002 as separate textures, and so on. But for now, if I hover over here, over the RGB, you'll notice that default is black. What that means is that if I export this texture right now using this preset, my diffuse color is going to be black, and that's not what I want. I want to actually populate it with the colors from the scene. So base color is what you would use, right? So from input maps, choose the base color, click and drag it over to the RGB, and then choose RGB channels. And then this way, you know exactly what input you want to output. Okay. Now, next up, I'm going to do something a little bit interesting, and that is because most of the time, what people are doing is dealing with individual maps for individual channels. But in the video game industry, things get a little bit more interesting, because what they often do is they try to pack as much information into the textures that they can, so that there's less read time between one texture and another, right? So to make things a little bit faster, they try to pack things in as much as they can. So in this case, I have this option to do an R plus G plus B. So if I click that, you'll notice that it looks a little bit different than RGB, right? And that's because the channels have been split up. So you have one channel for red, one channel for green, one channel for blue. And in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to populate it with metallic. So I'm going to click and drag the metallic onto the R, and then gray channel, yep. And then I'm going to do the roughness, and I'm going to put that in G. And then under B, I'm going to do opacity, because later on, for this asset, I'm going to be creating opacity as well. And so that I don't forget what channels are in these textures, I'm going to name it accordingly, right? So metal, rough, opacity, underscore. And then this will also represent that metal is R, roughness is G, and then opacity is B, right? So I'm also typing it in the order that the channels are being input into, so that way there's no confusion. And then $, texture set, so every one of those textures will be compressed, and then I'll have the texture set. And next and final step is to add a normal map to this. So RGB, and I'm going to simply click and drag the normal RGB channels, and then rename it to normal, underscore, and then choose the texture set. And that's pretty much it for this part, right? So now I'm going to go into the export and make sure my configuration is chosen, and it is in fact chosen. Make sure that my texture sets are selected, right? So there's a check mark for every single one of these texture sets, and then your texture resolution is to whatever it is that you need at the time. And then hit export. So when it's finally finished, you're going to be presented with this pop-up window, and it's going to give you two options. One, press OK, and it'll close this window and you can get back into texturing, or you can open up the folder. So if we open up the folder, you're going to get this thing right here. And here, as you can see, you have diffuse color underscore 1001, diffuse color 1002, and so on. And then you have these funny colored ones, which have 3 textures stored in them. So when they add up, they don't really make a lot of sense because they look pink, but we don't really care about that because we want to use their individual properties, right? So we want to use the properties from red, from green, and blue, basically meaning we have 3 textures stored in there. So we have metal, rough, and opacity. And so again, it makes sense for that. Our color, however, if you look at it, I mean, the colors make sense, right? And then finally we have the normal map. So that's pretty much it. I mean, in this video we made, we exported the textures, we made a preset, and we have the final result. So in the next video, I'm going to be setting up the rendering within Houdini and Redshift, and we're going to try to compare the result that we have inside of Painter and Houdini itself.